Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper is an environmental nonprofit organization in Western New York that protects and restores our water and surrounding ecosystems for the benefit of current and future generations. We clean up pollution, restore fish and wildlife habitat, create public access, and provide educational experiences for the community. These efforts are primarily focused in the Niagara River watershed. This watershed is over 1,000 square miles. A watershed is an area of land where all water, whether it be surface water or groundwater, flows towards the same point. In the Niagara River watershed, this water is draining to the Niagara River. The Niagara River watershed is part of the larger Great Lakes watershed, or Great Lakes Basin. This is a large system of many watersheds that all drain to the Great Lakes. At Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper, we have a staff with a wide range of professions. There are biologists, construction project managers, kayak instructors, and even an attorney. Today, you will get to meet 3 of our current staff members and learn a bit more about their career journey.
Hello, my name is Wendy Patterson. My role is Program Manager at Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper. I wasn't always interested in science, but I always loved animals. So for as long as I can remember, I enjoyed animal documentaries and going to the zoo. It wasn't until junior high that I really had an interest in science class. I struggled in school up until that point, and I had a science teacher that encouraged me. She saw that I was enjoying some of the work we were doing in the class and thought that if I tried a little harder, I might have some real success in that subject. And I also happened to have a really good friend who was also interested in science. So I went into high school with the idea from both the teacher who encouraged me and my friend who encouraged me that science might be a good path. I went to college twice. So first I went to SUNY Oswego to study zoology with the goal of becoming a zookeeper. And then by the end of my studies there, I wanted to go into conservation biology. And then I went to Central Michigan University for conservation biology master's degree. And I also had a career goal in mind of working for endangered species protection. I had a lot of different internship positions and I've volunteered a lot. I've tried a lot of different careers because it was hard for me to decide what I wanted to do. For example, I had an internship at the zoo, the Syracuse Zoo, and the aviary. That was really interesting. And I learned a lot about husbandry, but I found out that was not what I should do for a career. I also I volunteered for the biology club and I learned leadership skills from there, which was very impactful. And I needed those skills for the rest of my career path. And then also AmeriCorps, where I learned about conservation biology and specifically about land management. After I finished my undergraduate degree, I served in AmeriCorps. And so I worked at a national wildlife refuge in Maine, protecting a couple of endangered species like New England cottontail and piping plovers, and the habitat that they need to survive. And then after my graduate degree, I worked as a researcher for the Great Lakes and the Finger Lakes. So I studied things like mussels, their bivalves throughout the Great Lakes, both native and non-native species. But while I was doing research, I remembered what I had done through my internships and my volunteer work with outreach. So telling the general public about scientific work that's being done and engaging the general public in that work, and I missed it a lot. So I switched my career goal to be in outreach, and that's how I ended up at Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper. My role at Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper is as a senior member of the community engagement team. I most value working with volunteers. We have 3,000 volunteers at Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper, including the volunteer ambassadors, which are our most dedicated and highly trained volunteers, and they're very inspiring and represent the organization to the general public for us, and that's a great role to have. I also work as a teacher for the Young Environmental Leaders program, where I get to teach local high school students about environmental justice issues and bring my career experience to the classroom. And then lastly, I do a lot of grant writing. So our organization is mostly grant funded, and we have to propose projects to funding agencies. And that has also been very rewarding and interesting.
Hi everybody, my name is Charli and I am a landscape designer, planner, and project manager with Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper. I don't think I was ever interested in science knowingly when I was younger. I think most of my focus was on sports. I love sports. I had brothers. It was a very competitive environment. And so sports kind of dominated my life. But there was always this undertone of curiosity that I had about how things worked. And particularly, I had an interest for just the natural environment. Plants, water, streams, creeks, those things always, I just love to explore and just kind of tinker around with all that kind of stuff. So was it my focus? No, but it was there underneath the overwhelming sports obsession. Yes, I did go to college, although it didn't really work perfectly the first time. When I originally went to school, I didn't really have a clear career path. I didn't know what I wanted to do. To be honest, I didn't even really know what I was interested in because everything up until that point was pretty much um, dedicated to sports. So once sports was no longer in my life, I kind of was left thinking, well, who am I and what do I want to do? And so that first year at school, I didn't really know. I was at this school doing some architecture classes, doing some psychology classes, and there were components of those that were interesting, but I felt like I was neglecting my one interest that I had early on in life, separate from the sports, which was the natural environment, right? The ecology, the biology, horticulture, plants, all that kind of stuff, which interested me so much. So I sort of did a little bit of soul searching. I did a little bit of research, and I found another school that offered something called landscape architecture. And that just seemed like it was checking a lot of those boxes um, for my interests, which was I did kind of like to draw. I wasn't particularly good at it, but I enjoyed it. I liked the natural world. I was already taking architecture classes, so it all felt like it kind of would work out. And so I guess no, I didn't have a career path in mind. I didn't have a plan, but I went into the experience of college with an open mind to try to expose myself to as many different ideas as possible and hopefully find that path um, in a timely. And I'm lucky that I did. And so I ended up going to SUNY ESF, College of an ESF stands for Environmental Science and Forestry, and that's where I went into the field of landscape architecture. As part of the landscape architecture program, you take these very long classes, and they're called studios. And in these studios, you're exploring design concepts, you're doing crits, you're working with your professors, and you're just evolving whatever project it happens to be. Sometimes they're made up projects, and sometimes they're real projects, for real clients. And for me, that's how I met Waterkeeper, actually, is through one of those college studio classes. And the studio was focused on creating living shorelines as a way to help offset some of um, water quality issues they were having in Hyde Park Lake, which is in Hyde Park in Niagara Falls, New York. And so we were working with Waterkeeper during that studio, and I met a bunch of the staff there and was exploring these ideas of living shorelines and wetlands. And I was really, really fascinated with that and just really enjoying it. And the final studio ended with a presentation in the city of Niagara Falls. We presented our work. And after that presentation, Waterkeeper reached out and asked if I would be interested in interviewing. And so, I was so interested in the topic of living shorelines, and I really enjoyed the studio that I said, oh, absolutely, of course. I'd never really been to Buffalo before. I didn't really live anywhere else besides Long Island or in Syracuse when I was at school, so there was a little bit of fear of relocating, but I put that aside. I took the interview, and they offered me a position. And so right after school, I just started working with Waterkeeper. I just took that opportunity, and so that's really my after college experience. Is just I went from school to Waterkeeper, and here I am about 5 years later, and I'm still really enjoying everything that I'm doing. I think there's always opportunities to immerse yourself in the profession or whatever you're interested in through internships or volunteers, and there's always something local. For me, growing up on Long Island, I took advantage of a few, and the two that I want to talk about is the first one. I took up an internship in a landscape architecture firm in Manhattan, and I felt very overwhelmed. I felt I was way in over my head. I was very young, still learning what even is landscape architecture. And so couldn't help but feel intimidated, but sometimes it's good to be in those situations because you do learn a lot about yourself, and you learn a lot about whether or not this thing that you're pursuing is really of interest to you. The more insight you can get early on, the better. And that office experience, although it was a little intimidating, commuting on the trains and the subway and working in an office, it was very beneficial for those reasons that I said. And so I'm very happy that I did it. The other experience I had is kind of the flip side of landscape architecture, which is the construction element versus the office element. And I had an internship with a landscape contractor that did work in Queens, Brooklyn, Manhattan, Staten Island, Bronx, Long Island, a little bit in Connecticut, but kind of that tri-state, 5 boroughs area. And that was, again, you're around these big construction guys that have been doing this stuff longer than you've been alive, and here you are, this this skinny kid from Long Island trying to learn as much as you can. And again, a little bit of intimidation there, but definitely worth it. I learned a lot. I learned how to talk to people that are different from me. I learned how to see design in a different way, that it's not something that happens just on a piece of paper. It ultimately has to be built, and learning how things are built, what's an easy way versus a hard way, it just makes you better at what you do. And again, another tremendous experience. I'm so happy I had it. And so for you all, I'm sure there's plenty of opportunities in Buffalo, plenty of opportunities in this area to just immerse yourself in whatever it is you're interested in, to not only gain experience and skills, but to really gain insight onto whether or not this is something that you want to continue to pursue. At Waterkeeper, I am a landscape designer, I'm a planner, and I am a project manager. And so what most of my focus goes into is finding degraded shoreline environments, which in our world at this point they're pretty abundant. And so we find degraded shoreline environments, and we come up with a plan, a solution of how can we make these environments thrive again. How can we make these living shorelines versus these degraded environments which aren't really supporting any of the ecology around them? And so that's what we do. We start coming up with concepts, we take out trace paper, we take out our pens and our pencils, and we come up with an idea, and then we bring that idea to different funding agencies to try to figure out how can we get this built. And ultimately, we keep at it, and then hopefully something sticks, and we find a way to fund this idea. And once we fund this idea, we assemble a team, and that's where the project management comes into play. We get engineers, we get ecologists, we get contractors and people who can build stuff with heavy equipment, and we assemble them together and we move this idea, this concept through the design process and ultimately through into actual construction into the world. And at the end of the day, at the end of all that effort, we have a completely new shoreline that is supporting fish, wildlife, diverse plant life, and really serving as an asset for the community to fish, to go birding, and to just kind of escape the grind of everyday life. And once one project ends, we look to our left, we look to our right, and we find the next project, and the cycle repeats. And so that's what I spend a lot of my time doing, finding problems and then working with a good team to try to find good solutions.
Hi guys, my name is Margot Valenti and I am the staff attorney or legal and program advisor for Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper. Easy answer is I am not interested in science. Science is not my jam. However, you will learn, should you take a legal path, that science is the most important building block to underlie the fundamentals of environmental law. So I grew up on Lake Erie. I grew up spending my time on the beach, and I decided to dedicate my life to continuing to protect that beach that I love and that lake, and it's so meaningful to me. So I went to Mercyhurst College in Erie, Pennsylvania. I stayed on the lake, and there I was forced to take some science courses, which is potentially the best thing that has happened to me. I spent some time in a geology course digging trenches, holes in the sand on the beach to look at littoral drift and how sediment reacts over time. I took some biology courses, and those were really impactful to understanding the rest of what I wanted to do. I used to say in undergrad in my younger years that the only science I'm interested in is political. And so that's what I did. I have my degree in political science. And then I decided that I wanted more than that, and I wanted to be the best in the field, which is not the case. Do not go into your graduate degree thinking that's the case. But I decided to follow that path and go to law school. So I went up to Vermont and I did get my law degree, and I am licensed to practice in New York State. So that was my goal. Become a lawyer was my goal. And so that's what I used my undergrad to do. And as I said, through this process, I've been able to learn that science is the underlying fundamental to environmental law. So it is our building blocks of everything. And should you decide you want to be a lawyer, then science will be your best friend. Environmental sciences are exceptionally important to this field. Well, when I was in law school, I had a couple of really important internship positions, and the value that you gain through that type of work is also exponentially important. I was able to spend a summer at the DEC Great Lakes Division here at home in Buffalo. I was able to spend 2 semesters of law school in the State House in Vermont, working directly on legislative issues as a lobbyist and as a legislative counsel, which essentially a legislative counsel are the people who write the bills for the elected officials. There's a whole team of lawyers behind any elected body that does the writing, make sure that things are constitutional, that puts the words on paper, basically, so we can fight about them later. And those were really, really helpful to getting some real world understanding of what it takes to make law, to write law, to work with an elected body. After that, I went to Michigan. I went to Ann Arbor, Michigan on a fellowship through Sea Grant, which is part of NOAA, to work with the Great Lakes Commission. And through that fellowship, I was able to meet everybody in the basin, to attend conferences in all the Great Lakes states and get to see all of the lakes except Lake Superior. I still haven't touched that one. And following that position, I was able to make some connections at B&W. And when their need for a lawyer came up, I was able to come home and take my current position. At my current position, as I mentioned, am a lawyer. I serve as our really more of an in-house counsel. Most waterkeeper organizations are very litigious, meaning they go to court, they sue each other. That's their model. Waterkeeper, Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper, is much more of a community-focused organization. So I act more as an in-house counsel. So for instance, whenever Waterkeeper wants to do a project that will physically manipulate a shoreline, that's where I come in. I negotiate our access with the landowner. I do all of the insurance paperwork, all the liability assessments. I work with the landowner to get a writing that says we can come on their property and we can change it to better the habitat. And I also head up our advocacy and policy type of work. So working with the elected officials in New York State, the New York State Senate, and the New York State Assembly to pass good laws, to make good laws, to make sure that the bills that are being written are as protective of the environment and Western New Yorkers as we would like them to be. And I also serve as sort of an advisor to the rest of the staff. So whenever anyone has a question or they're wondering whether something's okay, if we want to look at a piece of property that we want to conserve, those are all the questions that run through me. And that is really the nuts and bolts of what in-house counsel at a nonprofit will do. Sometimes you'll find me at City Hall. Sometimes you'll find me at the City of Buffalo Planning Board. I'm really there to just kind of make sure that we conserve our watershed the best way that we can under the laws as they are written.